Good morning, y'all. Welcome. I've got a question for you. What is normal? Well, in psychology, normal is weird. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a brief look back into our last lecture. Did you see any patterns between all of the various psychologists that we talked about in our early psychology lecture? Well, here they are again. We talked about Wundt, James, Freud, Rogers, Maslow, Pavlov, Watson, Skinner, Bandura, and Chomsky. Do you see any similarities in these faces? If you notice that they're all old white men, you're absolutely correct. A lot of early psychology was done by a very limited portion of the overall population. We call this limited portion of the population the weird. When we look back at early psychology, we must look at who conducted the studies and who were the subjects of most of those studies, because these were the people that created the baselines of our understanding of humanity. And this baseline came to separate out what was considered normal from what was considered abnormal. And it all came from the weird. The weird is an acronym that stands for Westernized, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Now, the W in Westernized sounds like it should mean the western half of the world, but in reality, it wasn't quite that. Sadly, it was more like some parts of the United States and a few areas around Europe. E stands for educated. So who were those early researchers and those early subjects? Oftentimes, they were professors at universities conducting research on their students and the other people around the university. It was easy and convenient, but not representative of the global population. The I stands for industrialized, which means that they came from a nation that had undergone an industrialized revolution. They lived in cities where there were factories and cars. Nobody who lived in rural areas was asked. Nobody who was on farmland was studied, and no tribal nations were included. And of course, who could afford to live in those cities and get that education? The rich. So R stands for the rich. Simply by default, many of the early studies involved people with money and wealth. Our last letter, the D, stands for democratic. Not that they were a Democrat versus a Republican, but that they lived in a nation where the government was more democratic. One where if you spoke up, you believed your voice actually mattered. So you didn't come from a monarchy or a dictatorship or any other forms of government. So the weird, the westernized, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic is what has created our modern sense of normal, because early psychologists looked at these early studies based on these weird individuals and concluded that that's what it was to be human. However, when we combine the demographics of westernized, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic, you get less than 5% of the global population. This means that they had a very small and narrow sample population in comparison to the population as a whole. So early psychology was putting out conclusions about the entirety of humanity based on less than 5% of humanity itself. Therefore, their conclusions are very limited and biased. This also means that the understanding of the word normal, or what it is to be human, was also very limited and biased. Early studies often suggested that there were only two ways to be, creating a false binary. A binary is a step up from a singular classification in understanding. You go from one type of human to two types of humans. But it's still a simple and basic form of classification. Using these false binaries creates a sense of forced separation into one of two options, often oversimplified down to just good and bad. We can see these false binaries in concepts such as normal and abnormal, or healthy and sick, or smart and dumb, or man and woman, or straight and gay, or winner and loser. However, the more in-depth we go in classification and the more we understand in psychology, the more types of humans we find out about. And in learning about those other types of humans, we fill in some of those gaps left by early psychology's oversimplified classifications. These false binaries can lead to stigma and the oppression of the side deemed to be bad. As modern psychologists, we have to do a better job at understanding the nuances of humanity rather than judging and stigmatizing 95% of people. So for decades, we have been filling in gaps and creating a more nuanced understanding of humanity by studying more types of people. Modern psychology recognizes that most elements of humanity are in fact on a spectrum, which makes sense. It's actually a binary that doesn't make sense. In a binary, you're either one or the other, no middle ground. But think about the concepts of introverted and extroverted. Introverts are more mellow people. They don't tend to like a whole lot of stimulation. They tend to be less social, more homebodies. Extroverts, on the other hand, tend to be more outgoing, more social, and they like a lot of external stimulation. Now think about yourself. Are you 100% an introvert? Are you 100% an extrovert? Probably not. Like most of us, you're probably somewhere in the middle. Not an either or, but a little bit of both. And in your own life, you might be more or less outgoing in different situations. Your behavior is not an extreme either or choice. Now, with a wide enough sample, we can graph these differences in humanity, and they often form what's called a bell curve. You'll notice that the extremes on the graph, the far left and the far right, are actually pretty small, and that the vast majority of the data, that's the vast majority of the humans studied, lay somewhere here in the middle. A binary would graphically distribute data in the opposite way, where you'd have a tall bar on one side and a tall bar on the other, but nothing in the middle. So the concept of a binary does not match up with what we understand humanity to be. This tells us that when we look at humanity, humanity is actually on a nuanced spectrum, not a simple binary. Rather than being 100% introvert or 100% extrovert, most of us are somewhere in the middle, and the true extremes are rare. And this makes sense. Think about other organisms on the planet. Are there only two types of dogs? Are there only two types of fish? Are there only two types of birds? Are there only two types of plants? Obviously not. Everything in nature lies on a spectrum. Understanding that entire spectrum is what helps us understand the scope of being human. And that is the overall goal in psychology. We don't want to conduct science to weaponize or to use against other people. We want to use science to bring us together with a greater understanding of what it is to be human. Knowing where you fall on these various spectrums is what makes you unique. Recognizing where other people are on the spectrums can help you improve your relationships with those people. We don't want to judge other people for being on a different spot of the spectrum of humanity, but we want to learn from people who are on a different spot of the spectrum of humanity so that we can understand that entire spectrum. Now let's come back to your life for just a second. What is your concept of normal? And where does that concept come from? What are those perspectives that you understand well? And what might be some point of views that you're not as familiar with? And here's the big question. How can you become more familiar with those points of view that you don't understand as well? I like to travel to do this. I find that it's a great way to expand your perspectives and understand a greater section of humanity. Thank you all for listening today. If you care to share your thoughts, please drop a comment below. I'd love to hear what you have to say. If you'd like to know more, please like and subscribe. It'll help the channel grow. I'm Laura, and I look forward to talking with y'all next time.